I stayed way out of it. It's much the safest place to be.
And do you feel any sadness about how it's played out?
Oh, of course, you know, I mean, there are all sorts of issues and circumstances there, but you know, we've all been through there.
The British royal family has always been a masterclass in saying everything without saying a single word. Every placement, every absence, every gleaming piece of jewelry pinned close to the heart, it all means something. And right now, in the gilded corridors of Buckingham Palace, something seismic is happening. Something so quiet, so controlled, so utterly deliberate that most people are completely missing it. But not us. Not today. King Charles III has made his youngest brother, Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, a title last held by their father, Prince Philip, from 1947 until his death in 2021. For the public, there were dazzling smiles and a united front. But behind the ornate gates of the palace, a quiet war is being waged. It's fought with polite nods and hidden daggers, where a piece of jewelry becomes a declaration, a seating chart becomes an insult, and a subtle slight is delivered with such cold, precise calculation that the circles of the royal elite are still whispering about it to this very day. Prince Edward, the one who was always in the background, the one they consistently underestimated, the one the press corps conveniently forgot existed, appears to have just executed the most audacious power play the Windsor clan has witnessed in decades. And Camilla, the Queen! She was completely blindsided. Stay with me because this story cuts directly to the heart of the monarchy. This is the tale of the overlooked prince who has finally had enough of being silent. And trust me, when a man this patient finally speaks, even if it's through carefully orchestrated absences and perfectly timed appearances, the entire palace listens. The man they forgot to watch. For the vast majority of his public life, Prince Edward has been the royal figure that the press corps conveniently forgets exists, while his brother Andrew was grabbing headlines for all the wrong reasons, and Harry was dramatically departing the kingdom in what felt like a real-time Netflix series, and Charles was meticulously managing his long, winding journey to finally become king. Edward was just there, showing up, doing his job, without any fuss, year after tedious, unremarkable year. But here's what you need to understand about powerful people who operate in silence. They are never as passive as they appear. Edward is the youngest child of the late Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. He is the youngest brother of King Charles III. As of 2026, his position sits at a distant 15th in the line of succession. He was never groomed to be a central figure in the firm. He was the spare to the spare, the ultimate backup plan that the palace never truly expected to need. And yet, and this is the critical detail that the mainstream media consistently fails to mention, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh carried out multiple solo international tours back in 2025, not joint engagements on the coattails of more prominent royals, solo tours, representing the King and the United Kingdom on the world stage, while Charles's health kept him closer to home. Let that sink in for a moment. The forgotten prince was quietly becoming the monarchy's most active international ambassador. These weren't vanity trips or ribbon-cutting photo opportunities. These were serious diplomatic engagements. A historically significant visit to Papua New Guinea marking their 50th anniversary of independence, and a meaningful trip to Japan alongside Sophie. Edward was out there building international goodwill, cementing institutional trust, and constructing a public service record that stands entirely on its own, independent of whichever monarch happens to be sitting on the throne. During a period when other royals were navigating personal and public storms, when Andrew's disgrace was reaching its most chaotic crescendo, when William and Kate were dealing with health anxieties, when the palace's communications team was running damage control on multiple fronts, Edward and Sophie quietly positioned themselves as the monarchy's most solid, most reliable, most scandal-free ambassadors. And in the high-stakes game of a royal dynasty, that kind of unwavering loyalty is the most precious currency there is. The numbers don't lie, and they are devastating for Camilla. Now let's talk about the data, because these numbers tell a story more explosive than any tabloid headline. Polls indicate that roughly 50 to 51% of British citizens maintain a positive view of Prince Edward and his wife Sophie. Compare that with a mere 19% and 12% respectively holding unfavorable opinions of them. That is an extraordinary net approval rating for two royals who have spent most of their public lives flying almost entirely under the radar. But here's where it gets truly stunning. Queen Camilla's popularity has taken a sharp and alarming downturn. Just 42% of Britons now view her favorably, marking her lowest approval rating recorded by YouGov since March of 2021. And the segment of the population with a negative perception of her? It has swelled by 4 points to a worrying 45%. Just let those numbers really sink in for a minute. The actual Queen of England, the woman who fought for decades to claim her crown, who endured public hatred and tabloid brutality to stand beside Charles at the altar, is now less popular than the prince most people couldn't pick out of a lineup 5 years ago. More people across Britain currently have a problem with Camilla than actually approve of her. Meanwhile, Edward's net approval rating absolutely dwarfs hers. King Charles remains comparatively steady, with roughly 60% of Britons maintaining a positive view, nearly double the 31% who see him negatively. But that gap between Charles's numbers and Camilla's numbers? That gap is the fault line that everything else in this story runs along. Ask yourself this: in a constitutional monarchy, what happens when the queen consort becomes a political liability rather than an asset? What happens when the public face of the crown generates more disapproval than admiration? And, most crucially, what happens when the people quietly filling that void in public affection happen to be the very royals who are already positioning themselves for the next chapter? The answer is playing out right now, in real time, in the most British way imaginable. Through seating arrangements, jewelry choices, and very carefully timed absences. The language of jewelry. When a brooch becomes a declaration of war, inside the meticulously choreographed theater of royalty, absolutely nothing is left to chance. Not a single wave, not a fleeting glance, certainly not a seating arrangement, and most definitely not a piece of jewelry. As jewelry expert Justin Dortz, the managing director at Berganza, explains it, of all the royal jewels, brooches are the most managed and controlled. They are never simply a decorative afterthought. They are a signal. Think about that for a moment. Every single time you've seen a senior royal wearing a brooch at a major public engagement, someone, whether the royal themselves, a trusted aide, or a communications strategist, made a deliberate decision about what that brooch was communicating. It is costuming as political messaging. It is fashion as warfare. Dortz clarifies further. Unlike a necklace or earrings, brooches are not there to frame beauty. Their purpose is to frame intention. Placed strategically near the heart, they are imbued with symbolic power, loyalty, remembrance, duty. With that context, consider what Camilla did. The particular brooch she chose to wear during one of the most politically turbulent periods in the palace's recent history, right in the middle of the ongoing fallout from the Andrew affair and rising anxieties over William's inevitable succession, was no accident. In February 2023, Camilla was seen wearing a brooch meticulously crafted in the shape of the Tudor crown, a silver piece encrusted with sapphires, rubies, and emeralds. The Tudor crown carries enormous symbolic weight. It is the central element of King Charles III's official cipher, and it had not been seen on royal insignia since the reign of King George VI, Charles's own grandfather. With that single brooch, Camilla was putting Charles's complete authority on display, quite literally fastening his power to her chest. She wasn't just wearing jewelry. She was making a political statement visible to everyone who knew how to read the language she was speaking. It was a master stroke. But here's what makes Edward's counter-move so fascinating. He didn't respond with competing jewels or official statements. He and Sophie responded with something far more powerful: their own steadfast, reliable presence. They showed up where Camilla wasn't. They picked up the official duties that many presumed she would handle. They became the friendly, stable faces of the Windsor family at precisely the moments when the palace's PR team needed it most. As Dortz observes, this is the royal equivalent of jewelry that is designed to be noticed second, not first. It supports the moment rather than dominating it. And that sort of calculated restraint is an incredibly powerful and deliberate royal instinct. Edward and Sophie's quiet dedication is, in the silent coded language that governs the palace, their version of wearing the most powerful brooch in the room. They just don't need to pin anything to their lapels to say it. The Easter service that changed everything. All eyes were on one particular arrival at the Easter service in 2026. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, made her return to the holiday service for the first time since 2023, flanked by Prince William and their 3 children. The message was impossible to misinterpret. The Wales family was back, healthy, unbreakable, and absolutely ready for what comes next. This was especially powerful given the dramatic events of February 19, 2026, which had rocked the institution. A family previously battered by relentless illness and ugly rumors presented a united front, and the positioning of those standing around them told the entire story. Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, was present at the Easter service with his son James, the Earl of Wessex. They were joined by Princess Anne and her husband Sir Timothy Lawrence, as well as Peter Phillips, who attended with his daughters and his fiancée. Edward was visibly standing right beside William's future, and a world away from Camilla's past. Now here's the question you need to be asking yourself. Why does it matter so much who stands where at an Easter church service? Because in the world of the British monarchy, proximity is power. Physical placement at public events is the most visible expression of internal alliance. When Edward stood beside William's circle at Easter 2026, he wasn't just attending a church service. He was making a declaration of where his loyalties lie when the cameras are watching the whole world over. And what about Camilla's inner circle? They were noticeably scattered. Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, was widely expected to be present but was a last-minute no-show. The official explanation was that she was feeling under the weather. 2 other members of Camilla's wider network were also conspicuously absent. You could dismiss Sophie's absence as just a cold, a coincidence, bad timing. But here's the thing about the royal world. There are no coincidences. Every single absence is a deliberate choice. Every empty seat is a statement. And when you put all the pieces together, these separate events begin to form a picture of a family quietly but decisively realigning itself for the next generation. Edward is clearly throwing his lot more firmly in with William's rising camp rather than with Camilla's current power structure. And the future king doesn't need to openly block anyone to win this particular game. All he needs is to ensure the right people are perfectly placed in the frame when the world's cameras finally turn on. Right now, those people are looking increasingly like Edward and Anne, and far less like the network that surrounds the Queen Consort. Andrew's downfall rewrote Edward's role. Here's how. To truly understand the surge in Edward's influence, you have to grasp the seismic impact of Prince Andrew's downfall on the family's internal balance of power. Andrew's ultimate exile didn't just remove one senior royal from the board, it powerfully elevated another one to fill the vacuum. At 66, Andrew was unceremoniously evicted from the Grade II listed Georgian mansion, Royal Lodge in Windsor, that had been his home for years, the very place he had shared with his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson since 2004. He was relocated to Wood Farm, a far more remote property on the Sandringham estate. King Charles III himself officially stripped him of his remaining titles, forcing him into this new, isolated living situation. But here's the ripple effect that most observers missed entirely. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh had made plans to stay at Wood Farm for their Easter holiday. Plans they had to completely abandon because of Andrew's ongoing residency complications. Their long-standing holiday traditions were upended, not by any scandal of their own making, but entirely because of their disgraced brother's refusal to quietly disappear. Most people in Edward's position would have gone quietly to the press, fed a few choice details to a sympathetic royal correspondent, positioned themselves as a victim of circumstances beyond their control. It would have been easy, it would have been effective, and it would have done real damage to Andrew while generating genuine public sympathy for Edward. Edward did none of that. Instead, reports quietly emerged that Prince Edward was the very first member of the family to go visit Andrew after his arrest in February on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. Even as King Charles himself reportedly refused to see his own brother, despite being just a mile away at Sandringham, Edward paid a quiet, private visit. He wasn't there to defend Andrew's actions. He was there to firmly and privately encourage Andrew to speed up his departure from Wood Farm, subtly signaling that everyone in the family knew Andrew was intentionally dragging his feet. This single move reveals everything you need to know about Edward's strategic intelligence. He managed the family's internal chaos from the inside rather than running from it or exploiting it for headlines. He went directly to the source of the problem. He kept it private. He protected the institution. And then he moved on without taking any credit for it. That is not the behavior of a background player. That is the behavior of someone who is thinking 3 moves ahead. The honors snub that backfired spectacularly. When King Charles released his honors list in April of 2024, some very predictable names appeared on it. Queen Camilla, Prince William, Princess Catherine, and yet both the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, the couple who had been shouldering the largest share of additional public duties during the period when the king had scaled back his schedule following his cancer diagnosis, were glaringly excluded from the list. The public snub baffled royal watchers. Here was a couple doing significantly more work and receiving less official recognition for it. Here was the monarchy's most reliable workhorse couple being quietly sidelined on the official honors list, while those closer to Camilla's orbit were publicly celebrated. What did Edward and Sophie do in response? They kept their heads down and continued on diligently. No briefings to the press, no hints of wounded pride, no passive-aggressive scheduling conflicts, just quiet, uninterrupted service. And here's the brutal strategic irony of that decision from Camilla's camp. If the intention behind excluding Edward was to somehow sideline him, to signal that he was not fully valued within the current power structure, it produced precisely the opposite effect. It made him look like the most stoic, most loyal, most honorable senior royal in the palace. It made Camilla's camp look petty and politically calculating. And it gave Edward's steadily rising approval ratings yet another quiet boost among the British public who were watching closely and drawing their own conclusions. In the long game of royal survival, and make no mistake, this is absolutely a survival game, quiet loyalty wins. It always has. It always will. Camilla's crumbling ground. Let's be completely direct about what Camilla's declining numbers actually mean, because in a monarchy, public approval isn't just personal. It is profoundly political. With only 42% of Britons now holding a favorable view of her, the lowest figure recorded since March 2021, and with 45% actively holding a negative opinion, Camilla finds herself in a position that no queen consort can afford to occupy for long. More people dislike her than like her. That is not a footnote. That is a structural crisis. Camilla came into this family as an outsider who spent decades clawing for acceptance. She endured public hatred at a scale that would have destroyed most people. She was patient, she was determined, and she ultimately won. She got her crown. She got her place on the balcony. She got the title that once seemed completely out of reach. But winning the crown was never the end of the story. It was the beginning of the next battle, and the ground beneath her throne has been quietly cracking. This isn't thanks to Harry's bombshell memoir or Andrew's ongoing scandals alone. Those certainly haven't helped. But the most significant erosion of her position is coming from somewhere far more subtle and far more effective: the quiet, consistent, wildly popular presence of the king's youngest brother. He's not chasing the limelight. He's not competing with her directly. He doesn't need to. He is simply being so relentlessly decent, so unfailingly reliable, and so genuinely popular that the contrast does all the work for him. When a man with that kind of public goodwill starts making tiny, almost imperceptible adjustments, rearranging his schedule, politely declining specific royal engagements, materializing at functions where Camilla's inner circle is conspicuously absent, you can be absolutely certain that those inside the palace are taking very careful notes. Because as anyone who has ever navigated a complex institutional power structure knows, it's the quietest people who have the most profound things to say when they at last decide to speak. Sophie, the co-pilot charting her own course. To really grasp Prince Edward's game plan in its full strategic complexity, you have to pay close attention to Sophie. Within the intricate world of the royal family, spouses are never just passive figures. They are genuine co-pilots. They carry half the strategic weight. And Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, has been charting a very deliberate and tactical course. Sophie was widely expected to attend the Easter service in 2026. She was a last-minute no-show. Royal editor Rebecca English reported she was feeling under the weather, and her last confirmed public engagement had been on March 23rd at the Reasons for Hope Gala celebrating the legacy of Dr. Jane Goodall. A single illness-related absence might not mean much on its own, but Sophie and Edward were both absent from the major Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey just weeks prior. Two high-profile events, two absences, both events heavily associated with Camilla's role at the heart of the current royal establishment. Royal insiders and analysts are increasingly convinced that these very public absences are not a string of bad luck. They are a pattern. And in the world of palace politics, patterns are policy. What makes Sophie's strategic calculus so elegant is that when she does show up, she shows up perfectly. Her appearance at a past Commonwealth Day service, in a stunning coat dress by Susanna London, perfectly accented with a Jane Taylor hat and a clutch from Sophie Habsburg, was flawless, polished, professional, warm, the image of a modern royal doing everything exactly right. She is not backing away from royal life. She is being incredibly selective about which parts of royal life she chooses to participate in. And the particular image she and Edward are cultivating, reliable, warm, scandal-free, deeply committed to public service, fits far more comfortably with the monarchy's future than with its current political moment. That future, everyone in the palace knows, will revolve entirely around the Wales family once Charles's reign concludes. And Edward and Sophie are very deliberately positioning themselves within that orbit, rather than within the orbit of the current queen consort. Their absences from events are just as meticulously coordinated as their appearances. In the high-stakes world of palace politics, showing up is important, but sometimes not showing up sends an even more powerful message. William's unofficial coronation, and who's being left off the invitation list. It is time to discuss the enormous elephant in every gilded room in London. The arrival of King William V is no longer a distant theoretical event. It is an inevitability, and it is coming sooner rather than later. This single reality is now the driving force behind every calculation and decision being made within the walls of Buckingham Palace. The crucial question, the one that every high-ranking royal is quietly answering with their movements, their public appearances, and their pointed absences, is this: whose coronation is it really going to be? Kate's reappearance at the Easter service in 2026 was loaded with symbolic power. The Princess of Wales made her return to the holiday service for the first time since 2023, flanked by William and their 3 children. This was the first major public statement that the Wales family was fully back in action, healthy, unbreakable, and ready. It was a masterfully executed moment, and everyone who witnessed it understood exactly what it meant. Around this looming throne, you can already see the new alliances beginning to solidify. And around the Wales, the royals choosing to cluster are revealing everything about where they believe the future lies. Edward was there. Anne was there. The message was clear. Now ask yourself honestly, where was Camilla in all of this positioning? Where were the people most closely associated with her network and her influence? Scattered, absent, notably missing from the frame. Camilla's ascent to Queen was a hard-fought, decades-long victory, but it is fundamentally a temporary appointment. The very moment William takes the throne, Kate steps up as Queen Consort, and Camilla will have to transition into a very different role. What that looks like, whether she becomes an influential Queen Mother figure or a forgotten figure from a previous chapter, will be decided in the years leading up to that massive shift, not after the fact. And you know who is keenly aware of every dimension of this dynamic? Edward. His entire approach, quiet loyalty, unwavering service, a very deliberate distance from Camilla's tanking approval ratings, reveals a seriously long-term game plan. He isn't just surviving the current reign. He is building the relationships and the public profile that will define his position in the next one. The long game. How a forgotten prince rewrites his own story. Think carefully about what Edward has actually built over the past several years, because it is genuinely impressive when you step back and see the full picture. He has accumulated significant international goodwill through solo diplomatic tours at a time when other senior royals were unavailable or embroiled in controversy. He has maintained the highest net approval rating among senior royals who are not heirs to the throne. He has handled the Andrew crisis with remarkable emotional intelligence, managing the family's internal chaos privately and effectively. He has absorbed public snubs with such composure that the snubs ultimately damaged those who delivered them more than they damaged him. He has done all of this without a single tabloid briefing, without a tell-all interview, without one whispered leak to a sympathetic journalist, and without a single piece of jewelry making a calculated power statement. His strategy is, in its brilliant simplicity, almost breathtaking. He shows up. He does the work. He avoids flashy statements. He lets his presence do the talking. And just as importantly, his carefully chosen absences send a message that his words never have to. After 60 years of existing in the royal background, 60 years of being the spare to the spare, the forgotten prince, the one the cameras always passed over, Prince Edward is quietly, methodically, remaking the foreground of the British monarchy. And here's the most remarkable thing of all. He hasn't had to fight anyone to do it. He hasn't had to plot, scheme, or maneuver in any way that would leave a visible trail. He has simply outlasted the chaos around him. He has simply continued to be the one thing the British public seems to crave from their royal family right now. A senior member who is steady, decent, hardworking, and utterly, refreshingly scandal-free. What happens next? And why it matters more than you think? Despite all the internal turbulence, attitudes toward the royal family as a whole remain remarkably resilient. Nearly 6 in every 10 Britons still hold favorable views of both the family and the institution of the monarchy itself. About half the public still believes the monarchy provides good value for money, and with nearly half expressing genuine pride in the British monarchy, the institution itself is going to be just fine. But here's the fascinating part. The personalities who actually define that institution, the faces you see on the balcony, the names splashed across international headlines, the tight-knit family at the heart of the whole spectacle, are all very much in flux. The Game of Thrones happening within those palace walls right now will determine the shape of the monarchy for the next generation. Camilla's position, despite her crown, is more fragile than it has ever been. Her approval numbers are at historic lows. Her allies are scattered. The events meant to showcase royal unity keep revealing fractures instead. And the quiet, consistent presence of her husband's youngest brother keeps growing in influence precisely because it presents the sharpest possible contrast to her own complicated image. Edward, meanwhile, has the most important assets available in the long game of royal politics: time, patience, public approval, and the trust of the man who will be the next king. Because that is ultimately what all of this comes down to. When William's coronation finally arrives, and it will arrive, the people sitting in the front rows of that ceremony will be the royals who were smart enough to see which way the wind was blowing years in advance. They'll be the ones who dedicated themselves to serving the crown as an institution, rather than cozying up to any one person's agenda within it. They'll be the ones who showed up when it counted, stayed quiet when it was strategic, and let their record of service speak for itself. Every single clue right now points to Prince Edward having made exactly that choice. Quietly, deliberately, and with a level of strategic patience that would make a chess grandmaster genuinely envious. The bigger picture, a silent revolution in plain sight. The most fascinating power struggle in the British monarchy isn't the loud, messy drama of Harry versus the firm. It isn't Andrew's ongoing humiliation or the relentless tabloid speculation about William and Kate. Those are the stories generating the most noise. But they are not the story that will matter most when we look back at this period in a decade's time. The story that will matter is this one. The slow, silent, impeccably polite game of chess happening in plain sight. The power of seating arrangements and scheduling conflicts, and the incredibly subtle messaging of jewelry choices. The accumulating weight of a public service record built brick by brick over years of quiet, unglamorous work. The strategic value of simply refusing to be dragged into the chaos swirling around you. Prince Edward has spent the better part of 6 decades being overlooked, underestimated, and quietly patronized by everyone from the press corps to his own palace. They wrote him off as the spare to the spare. They forgot to include him in the honors lists. They assumed his proximity to power was a polite fiction rather than a genuine asset. They were wrong. Spectacularly wrong. And the most extraordinary thing about Prince Edward's particular brand of power? He doesn't need anyone to acknowledge it for it to be real. He doesn't need a headline or an official statement or a shiny brooch pinned near his heart. His power is built into the very architecture of his public image. Steady, trusted, genuinely popular, and completely untouchable by the scandals that have taken down every other significant royal figure around him. That is, when you think about it, the most dangerous kind of power there is. So here's the question I want to leave you with today. In a palace filled with people making noise, speaking loudly, leaking stories, and fighting battles in the open, who do you think is going to come out on top? The loudest voice in the room? Or the one who has been quietly, patiently, methodically building something real for the past 60 years while everyone else was looking the other way? The overlooked prince has finally stopped being silent. He's just doing it in a language that requires you to pay very close attention to hear. And you'd better believe that every single person inside the palace is listening. So what do you think? Is Prince Edward playing the most brilliant long game in modern royal history? Or is this all being read too deeply into? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This one genuinely deserves a real conversation. Because whether you're a lifelong royal watcher or you stumbled across this video completely by accident, something about this story clearly pulled you in. And maybe that says everything. If this deep dive has shifted how you see the quiet dynamics inside the palace, hit that like button and subscribe. We don't cover the noise, we cover what's underneath it. The next chapter of this story is already unfolding and will be right here when it does.